Yes, there used to be a time when being on the dole was a source of shame, welfare, the dole. Whether personal or provincial, there was a great sense of pride for people to pull their own weight. Times have changed. Now more than half of Canada's provinces are on the dole for federal funds, the have-nots of equalization. The great province of British Columbia continues to be one have province at the moment. That means they've been doing their part to bankroll largesse in Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, the Maritimes. But that could all start to change for the worse within just a matter of weeks. On May 14th, that's just around the corner, the people of British Columbia appear poised to send their province in the direction of economic catastrophe in exchange for a short-term spending spree. But it's not too late. BC voters can still use some Canadian common sense. Could BC actually become a have-not province? I mean, I'd view that as a Canadian disgrace, wouldn't you? British Columbia has so much going for it. I mean, they're blessed with so much potential, comparable to California in a lot of ways. Few of us could travel to the left coast without reaching the same conclusion. It's one of the richest regions on the planet, abundant resources, entrepreneurship experience, strong education. It's a tourist mecca. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But politics can screw those beautiful things up, and quickly. BC stands at a crossroads. When it comes to GDP, the BC economy, fourth strongest in Canada, third lowest debt to GDP ratio, hovering around 18%. But like so many other areas around the world, spending, and the resulting debt, big problem. Currently at $38 billion. There are two paths to choose from, and the risk is very real of sliding further into fiscal ruin. But that choice is in the hands of BC voters. In British Columbia, if the polls are telling the truth, the NDP under the leadership of Adrian Dix, set to become the next premier of the province, pushing Liberal incumbent Christy Clark aside. Now, Clark is not an ideal candidate, not by any stretch of the imagination, but her ideas are the closest thing to reason that we can reasonably hope for. Yes, folks, the Conservatives don't have a hope in Hornby's chance of getting elected. So let's just focus on the most probable outcomes here. First of all, resources. Environmentalists may view Dix as some sort of eco-warrior that's going to save pristine and beautiful BC from the evil energy companies. But what eco-warrior Dix will only end up achieving is to hack away at BC's economy with a double-edged sword. Because if the voters pick him, they'll be curtailing both reasonable development as well as jobs and new government revenue that would help BC remain a proud have province. But those Dix NDP voters are also vetoing Christy Clark's campaign promises of a debt-free BC through resource development. A BC Liberal plan that envisions a jump from $1.2 billion of deficit over the past year to $100 million, $200 million surplus next year. A plan that might need to be taken with a grain of salt, but one that still is pushing provincial finances in the right direction. Instead, NDP leader Dix is trashing all that. He's promising a whole heck of a lot more spending, billions more, in order to pay for his dream for British Columbia. That's right, upwards of $2 billion in handouts, even $3 billion by some estimates, to iron out what he views as income inequality via heavy government intervention. That's his solution to everything, government. Lots of free fish, no fishing rods, as the Sun's national affairs columnist Anthony Furey will tell us in a moment, crushing any hopes of fiscal balance for years to come. So, people of BC, I'm speaking to you directly right now. With so much potential within your grasp, please do not strive to be yet another have-not province. I'm living in one. I know what I'm talking about. You are so much better than that. Think about it. You can start living within your means to have a sustainable future for your children and grandchildren. Please do not go the way of Greece and live it up short term in that welfare state that short term feels like a good buzz. It's not. That's Canadian common sense.
This election is about the economy. it's pretty obvious, given what the NDP have been talking about in the last little while, that they are not committed to growing the economy. I don't think it's any surprise that after weeks and weeks of Adrian Dix saying he was going to be Mr. Positive, now that apparently the polls are tightening up, they're going on constant negative attacks. Now that they feel like they could lose this election, they have thrown those principles out the window.
Clark counterattack in BC. Polls tightening up a bit, and the reigning premier is pulling out all the stops to get voters to recognize what would happen if the NDP ran the province's economy. BC Bounty. The province is one of the greatest places on earth with nearly limitless economic potential, yet it could actually become a have-not province. National Affairs columnist Anthony Furey has been all over the story. Anthony, it's not like BC hasn't seen have-not before. They did see it with the NDP, with the same crowd that wants to come in this time. That's why they turfed them out 10 years ago. So this one is weird. I mean, for them to turf them out, turf the Liberals out, they'd almost have to have amnesia. Is that something that you think is going on right now, that people just remember the last 10 minutes, but they don't remember what it was like 10 years ago?
Voter amnesia. Charles, that's never happened before in a democracy. We always remember the lessons from the past, and we never make those mistakes again. Yeah, I know BC definitely was in a bad situation on the equalization payment grid in the past, and now they're pretty much one of the only 4 provinces that's contributing to the pot to help places like Quebec and PEI with their largesse. But I'm looking at the numbers right now, and I'm just looking at the language of this debate, and I'm saying, I think you guys are really teetering on the edge right now. They're in a position where things could go okay, but they're at that turning point right now, and it's all about some important choices that they make in the next couple of years.
Well, you know, pardon me, by the way, for serving up that rhetorical softball. I just think we needed to make the point that if people have amnesia and don't know it, maybe they ought to think about it. I'm addressing remarks very much to BC tonight because I'm trying to pull their you-know-whats out of the fire here. Look, I think people do tend to focus on the here and now. They do tend to focus on small ball, like Christy Clark and her kid telling her, after they've stopped at 5:30 in the morning at a red, Mom, you can go through because there's obviously no one at the corner. And then it gets portrayed as Christy Clark was like running the red, like some person in a van that killed a family of 5 that really did run the red. And people get hyped by that stuff. And so I guess that stuff is in a way, in the moment real-time news. I guess it's in a way sadly sexier than something like, well, are they going to plunge the energy industry into darkness and snuff tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars?
Oh, for sure. The red light scandal is not a scandal. NDP candidate Jane Shin said what I imagine was probably the most polite thing someone said on this online gaming forum 11 years ago, and they're trying to get her on that for making an anti-Asian comment. She is an Asian person herself. That is not a real issue. We got to ignore that. But there were even kind of gotcha moment scandals just the other month. The whole ethnic gate issue that we're going to spend our money for cheap wins with apologies. Ujjal Dosanjh, the NDP premier of past in BC, who was once originally pushing the apology industry, he's actually come out and said, I've now changed my ways. I've realized it's wrong. I mean, I think even that should be a more tangible scandal than the red light scandal because again, they're wanting to use essentially the public money to try and win votes. And I think that's a bit of a scandal, but that's gone out of the news right now. Obviously, the thing that I think people should stay with most is just analyzing the budget charts. But campaigns are only a few weeks long, and the red light debate for some reason is easier for some people to discuss than the budget debate.
Anthony, let's talk about the crowding out here in Canada, have not to have. If BC also joins the have-nots, so who's in that rogues gallery? You've got Ontario, obviously, getting deeper into have-not country with, I guess, what we'll call this quasi-coalition there, the Liberals and the NDP. You've got Manitoba, where I'm sitting right now. You've got the Maritimes. So we're down to what? Who's the have? I mean, who's sugar daddy? Alberta and Newfoundland? I mean, Quebec takes up half of the equalization pot. So, I mean, it really is down to just then Saskatchewan, Alberta, Newfoundland. Those are the only three.
Got it.
It seems to me 3 against 7. At some point, this hammock is going to collapse.
Well, we've really got to talk about this stuff more and more because people, it drives me nuts, Charles, that for some reason people think that political budgeting is very different than corporate budgeting and family budgeting. No, it's all the same thing. You make money, you have revenues, you have expenses. In years when your expenses exceed your revenues, sure, you go into debt, but eventually you got to deal with that. So simple. The biggest nonsense about the last U.S. presidential election was that Mitt Romney gotcha moment when he said 47% of people are essentially, they want government to provide all things to them. He was right. Reports have gone out to prove that he was wrong because it's actually 47.8 or something. He was off by a percent. But what did he do? He became a little coward and he got his tail between his legs and he ran, and it was seen as some victory for Obama. I mean, that was the best point Romney made in the entire campaign, but he didn't make it proudly, and we have to make it more proudly now. And I'm not out to get angry at people who are needing assistance. For instance, some of that 47%, I assume a minority of it, legitimately have a reason to be getting support from the state at that time. But we got to remind people, hey, basic math. It's not just a reality for you when you're out there in the grocery store. It's a reality for your government. And I know people...
Anthony, we got to wrap up here, but there's a decision to be made here, and BC and others have to make a decision. Do we want to be the country of the work ethic or the country of the dole? If we want to be a dole country, all we have to do is look at Greece and we'll see the future. Anthony, thank you so much. Anthony Furey on Furious Friday, and he's our national affairs columnist for Sun Media. He's based in Ottawa.